Okay, everyone, welcome to the session. My name is Abdul Chohan, and I'm going to be speaking to you about supporting hybrid learning environments. I am a former high school teacher. I've been a senior leader. I've been a principal for a short while. I'm based in the UK, just outside Manchester, and my current role is as VP of Learning at Showbie. So my responsibility is very much about working with schools, teachers, senior leadership teams to make sure that the tools are being used effectively and are actually having an impact on learning. So I do a lot of kind of training with teachers, with leadership teams, and also having a lot of discussions with schools about the possibilities with Showbie and the kinds of things that are possible that sometimes people were not necessarily aware of. So I'm open to questions as we go along. What I have done is there is a Q&A kind of box in the chat, and I've got like a second screen running, and that will be kind of available. So feel free to put your questions in Q&A rather than chat, because I won't be looking at the chat as we go along. I can look at the chat at the end, and feel free to kind of collaborate between yourselves on the chat as well. But yeah, one thing I will say is that don't feel like you have to make copious notes on this session, because it is being recorded. At the end of this session, I will share my email with you, and if you send me your email, or if you email me, I can then send you a link to this particular presentation, which you can download, and then I'm more than happy for you to share this with colleagues as well. So this particular session around supporting hybrid learning environments, specifically using Showbie, is going to be a mixture of some slides, some of me talking, and also at the same time, some hands-on, some demo stuff that I can show you right within Showbie as well, and some other tools which you may not be aware of are now part of the Showbie suite. So let's kind of get started with this. First and foremost, I'm going to make reference to a number of things through this, and I'm using the UK standards organization, which is known as Ofsted, because I appreciate there might be people on the call that are not from the UK as well. So I'm using some of these documents here. We have an organization here in the UK called the Education Endowment Fund that does a lot of research and provides evidence on how education, of different aspects in education. So I'm going to be making reference. I've used that as a source and a reference as well. And there's also the National Foundation for Educational Research, which also does a lot of research and shares things on here. So definitely worthwhile kind of looking at from that perspective as well. So let's kind of make a start. I'm gonna talk a little bit about SchoolKit. SchoolKit is a new kind of solution from Showbie. It includes Showbie, but there are some really powerful additional apps that are now part of SchoolKit. So what I kind of the apps that I kind of refer to are part of that. Now, if you don't know whether you have SchoolKit or you don't, you might want to get in touch with whichever people you speak to at Showbie around kind of purchasing, and you can ask them about that after this as well. So definitely worthwhile looking at from that perspective as well. Okay, if I just kind of move on. Before we start, I think probably one of the most important things that is kind of quite key to this is the importance of workflow. And it's really important to understand whether your organization has a very clearly defined workflow with respect to technology, with respect to a hybrid learning environment. This is really key. Quite often, even before COVID, even before lockdown, there were schools that were had a digital program, devices for all students and so on. But if the workflow is not set and agreed upon and it's not consistent across the organization, then actually those kind of projects quite often suffer, fail, don't have the impact that you would expect them to have. So what do I mean by the workflow? I always use the analogy of taps and plumbing. So what I mean by that is that all the technology that we have, the hardware, the phones, the iPads, the laptops, for me, they're very much like taps. They're shiny, you can easily turn them on, and we expect water or learning to come out of those things. However, as we know, the water does not come from the tap, it comes from all the plumbing that's behind it. And that takes design, that takes somebody to make sure that it's fit for purpose and so on. So the workflow is really the plumbing. And these questions that are coming up now, traditionally, are questions that as teachers, we already knew the answers to. So if we were in the classroom, we already know how to share new subject content, whether that's the teacher explaining something, whether it's worksheets, whether it's textbooks, we would know that. Whether it's PowerPoints or we're showing a video on a screen and so on, we would know how we would do that. But actually, when we begin to look at a hybrid learning environment, when we are sharing resources that might have to be suitable in the classroom, but at the same time, they've got to be suitable at home as well, or in some cases, and certainly some countries that I've been working with, where you've got some children at home and some children in school, we then need to start thinking about how are we going to share the subject content? What tools are we using? What's the consistent approach? Is it simple and reliable? These are really two important concepts. If it's not simple, if it's not reliable, it's not going to work. If it's simple and not reliable, it's not going to work. And vice versa. So this is really kind of key, and it has to be a theme as you kind of design your workflow. This is also really important, where and how a teacher is going to send the assignments to students. This is actually quite key. I've spoken to schools recently where it's kind of, they've been still doing it through email, and the barrage of emails that they receive from students have kind of been, almost impossible to handle. There are a variety of different ways of kind of sending assignments to students. Obviously, Showbie provides a workflow for this, and this is really the problem that Showbie is solving. Yeah, that it's allowing teachers to send assignments to students. Students can submit the completed work as well, and also there's a big element in Showbie around feedback and the quality of feedback that can be given. That's why we're seeing schools that might use Google as well in terms of their kind of infrastructure, and they might have all their resources on there, but they're still using Showbie to give feedback. And all schools that might be using Office 365, but they're still using Showbie to give feedback because of its ability to kind of do digital annotations and add voice and video, and to kind of deal with the variety of different traditional handwritten kind of documentation, as well as digital kind of resources, whether they might be videos or audios or podcasts and so on as well. And finally, and this is kind of being quite key, how do students respond to that feedback? Traditionally, that would have been, they might make amendments in their books. Some schools use different colored pens and so on. But actually, from a Showbie perspective, there's a whole host of additional ways in which the students can respond to feedback. So that might be a video feedback, a selfie feedback, it might be a voice annotation, it might be an annotation using the pen feature and so on. It might be responding to quizzes and Socrative and so on. So we'll look at some of those as well. So this workflow element is quite key. And the first question to ask is, in your organization, is there a consistent workflow? Do students, parents, and teachers, are they all aware of the workflow that the school is using? Okay, so that's kind of quite key. If we move on, there's a couple of things that I kind of want to address. So live lessons, there's been a lot of push for live lessons since the last lockdown, or since kind of schools have been setting up hybrid learning. Although they do have their uses and they can be quite powerful, it's not always the case that live lessons are going to be the best. It is worth considering a variety of different approaches based on the type of content that you might be teaching. It's worthwhile considering flipped learning models. If at this point, I'm just going to be jumping in and out of this, but if I go into Showbie, the idea of a flipped learning model is the fact that you can record video and actually share that out to students is actually quite powerful. And the students can watch that beforehand and watch it a number of times is actually quite key. One of the kind of key features that's there within Showbie, and if I just kind of find the right place for this, I'm going to show you this particular feature. Actually, let me just find the right class where this might be. No, it's not in this one. Here it is. Okay, so this is something that I was showing to a senior leadership team, but actually, it's a relatively new feature. If I just go to shared items in Showbie, and if I tap on the plus icon, right at the bottom, you can see this record screen feature. Now, I'm obviously sharing this with you on my iPad. So on iPad, this is available because it's using that technology. But even if you don't have iPad, you can use things like Loom, loom.com, Loom.com. It allows you to kind of do screen recordings. The nice thing about it from a Showbie perspective at the moment, if I show you one that I did and I just kind of shared, is that it adds to the simple and reliable nature. If you have colleagues that are not very technical and so on, this thing doesn't ask you where do you want to save it, what file name do you want. It just makes it and shares it out to students. So it's super simple and easy. And the additional advantage, so if I just play this screen recording that I did at that school, you can see that it has this front-facing video of myself, and I can make that full screen if I want to. And also at the same time, if I wanted to, I could flip the screen and get it pointing to something else. So if I'm speaking about a particular document, or it might be an object or something, and I'm just kind of speaking over it, talking about it, then I can do that as well. You can make it slightly larger. You can move the video into different corners of the screen and so on. So that's absolutely quite useful. But where I think this adds significant value is right within Showbie. You can bring up a blank document, a PDF, a PowerPoint, and then you can begin to annotate and explain over it. Now, this can be actually much more useful as an asynchronous recorded lesson rather than having to do live lessons all the time. So there is this kind of thinking, and there was an article published just yesterday about some people thinking that live lessons are the gold standard, but it's not necessarily the case. They do have a lot of advantages. They can make aligning the curriculum very easier. You can keep people's attention because you're kind of there watching them. But actually, and also, obviously, the teacher has control over the learning environment, right? What do they want to do? Where do they want to kind of, what's the next activity, and so on. But however, they're not always more effective than synchronous learning approaches. So I think that's something that's definitely to bear in mind. And actually, being able to share this, and then the teacher being available to kind of, for interactive chats, to kind of give feedback and so on. Actually, there's some powerful things. Now, in the past, recorded lessons were very difficult. Obviously, with Showbie now, this is kind of built in and is hugely, hugely powerful. The quality of teaching is really what matters, rather than the ability to just kind of push out. Being able to kind of see all the students and then being able to see you. Although, that can be quite key. The other thing that some of the evidence suggests is that the concentration of students online is actually shorter than a typical length of a lesson. So if you're just trying to translate what you would do in the classroom through a live lesson, that might actually be very ineffective. And although you might feel the students are there, it doesn't necessarily mean that the concentration is going to be there. Making shorter clips and kind of being able to share that might be a better approach, and one that's worth considering. Okay, I'm just going to be switching in between. Let's just look at the next thing. So one thing to note as well is that remote learning is actually a way of delivering education. It's not the same as digital education. Okay, so that's something that we have to clearly kind of differentiate. Digital learning is different. They're like online courses. There's organizations like Udemy and people like that do kind of digital learning. There's courses that you can apply for at Cambridge and Harvard now as well that are kind of completely digital, and it's all digital learning. Everything from A to Z has been designed around that. The Open University is a pioneer of digital learning. They've done a lot of things from that perspective as well. So all their resources are designed for remote access for people around the world. Remote education is a little bit different. Remote education will take into consideration that actually sometimes it might be that the students are using worksheets, or they have to write pen to paper, and there's more kind of analog interaction as well. So whilst that is kind of key, and I think that's the challenge that we have at this moment in time that educators are facing around the world, that we're looking at remote education and not digital learning. If we were doing digital learning, we would not have a problem right now, because actually all our resources and planning and everything would have taken the technology and the fact that everything is digital into consideration from the beginning. But remote education is different. We are looking at some analog tools as well. And this is, again, where Showbie can be quite powerful, because if you ask students to actually submit things from a paper-based or a handwritten kind of setup, then that's absolutely possible. And you can see in these scenarios, I've been able to, in shared items, in this scenario, I've been able to upload a scan of a book, and then I can annotate over this. The fact that I can tap and add voice notes, this is actually quite powerful. This voice note feature is designed to do this. So actually, it works really well. If I just hit the record button, hey, this is really great. I can still see some spelling, punctuation, and grammar errors that need correcting. Please, can you highlight them in green, and have another go at writing those sentences? Thank you. And if I just hit the save button, and obviously there's a number of things here that are highly valuable. You know, I'm just speaking to the students like I would psychologically. The way even though I'm saying the same thing, how I speak to one student is going to be different to the way I might speak to another student. I can also kind of rename voice notes and so on, which is quite powerful. And I think if you are already a Showbie school and you're a Showbie user, and you've had this for some time now, it would be useful to start thinking about how this would work across your organization as a standardized approach. Also, you know, can this now enter into a policy in your organization, in that we now have new tools that allow us to do things that we couldn't do before? So that means that, you know, maybe it's time to kind of look at policy and look at the way in which we can kind of do things differently. And even before COVID, there's a number of leadership teams that I worked with where they now have a digital verbal feedback policy in the organization. In fact, it's just a feedback policy, but within it, it makes reference to handwritten work being submitted, but it also makes reference to how teachers are giving feedback in terms of digital tools and how students can return that feedback as well. So that's definitely something to think about. It can be hugely powerful in an organization, and you know, it's definitely worthwhile kind of considering. Okay, if I just come out of this, and let me just go back to the presentation. So that's remote education. This is really quite key, and I think sometimes with technology, we find that it can get complicated because there might be too many tools that you're using, or actually the tools that we're using don't have a degree of simplicity attached to it. Now, the idea of keeping it simple, we've heard this in education so many times, but actually it's a very powerful tool to change belief and behavior. Okay, people's thinking, people's behaviors are influenced by the way in which they think, and if they feel that they're not very good at technology, or I don't use this and so on, then that can kind of influence their behavior in that, this isn't for me and so on. However, we've been forced into this kind of digital environment now because of the current situation. So that means the type of tools that we choose have to be very, very simple to use. That's one thing. The other thing is the workflow that we mentioned right at the beginning should also be very, very simple and easy to follow. And from a pedagogical perspective, the whole concept of cognitive science and how we learn, all of that still applies. We don't need to make big changes to the way in which we teach. However, with the whole remote learning concept, we've just got to think about the fact that we now have some additional tools, and actually can we apply a degree of simplicity to this. So let me show you some examples from a Showbie perspective. So I'm in a class. These are my students on the left-hand side, as you can see, and I'm in shared items. Maybe, I want to kind of just give them some feedback or direct them in a particular way. I can write a comment. So typically on a browser-based system, or if you're using this on a laptop, you can just kind of type in a comment, right? That's great. You can also now on the iPad, you can even write and scribble with a stylus or the Apple Pencil, and it'll just convert it to text. So that's another way in which you can just keep it really simple. But actually, for me, the biggest simplicity is the fact that you are just using our, human approach to communicate, which is speaking. So I just tap voice note and I just speak. And I think that there's even in a typical classroom setup, but even from a remote education perspective, I think this is really powerful, because if I hit the record button and I just speak, so hey guys, I want you to kind of look at the next document that I'm going to upload, and I want you to complete pages 2 and 3. Hit post, and actually that voice note is there. Students would be notified through the activity center. There's a notification thing that kind of pops up. But the fact that they're just going to hear me, and I've just spoken to them without me being in the classroom, I've spoken to them at my own convenience. This kind of simplicity is actually hugely powerful. In one school, I did an impact study, and we measured the number of students, and we just introduced Showbie, the number of students that responded to the teacher's feedback. So teachers are always giving great feedback, but actually through a lot of Hattie's work, we know that feedback from good quality feedback that teachers give is brilliant. However, it's no good if the students don't respond. So when we looked at the responses from students, certainly with digital verbal feedback and voice notes, what we found was actually that we had more students responding, especially those that had English as a second language, or the teaching language is not the first language, students that had additional needs, and even students that were at the other end of the kind of spectrum in terms of, they perform very well and so on. The fact that they could articulate and speak and explain things and respond to feedback was actually quite a powerful thing. And it's simple to do. And actually, we found this. There were many more students. There was a certain percentage number, which I'm not going to quote because I can't remember, increase in the number of students that were consistently over that time now responding with voice. So that's quite powerful. The other thing about this is with Showbie as well, obviously, if you have parental kind of communication, which is pretty essential at the moment, because parents can see and hear the teacher's feedback, so therefore their ability to support the children at home is significantly higher. So that kind of simplicity means that we can use technology in quite an easy way and an effective way as well, and making sure that we're putting the education part and the learning part before the technology. The next thing to kind of think about is this. So feedback, retrieval, practice, assessment, obviously are still important. We do this in school. We do this in our classrooms. We've been doing it for a long, long time. But actually, there is an opportunity to kind of do this through some very powerful ways. So in some of the research and the sources that I mentioned, immediate feedback has been done in a variety of different ways through remote education. So there's chat room discussions, yeah, and we know that the discussions area in Showbie, that's very useful, and that's been kind of quite great to give feedback. However, Showbie does provide one-to-one feedback right within the assignment area, so that's great. There's if you're using touch screens and so on, yeah, being able to kind of annotate and kind of give feedback verbally, that's been quite powerful. We have things like Socrative, which allow for remote assessment, yeah. So, and in that whole thing integrated together is quite powerful. So if I just come out of this and I go into Showbie again, let me just go into Showbie again, and I'm going to show you how this feature is actually quite powerful. So if I just go back, and I'm going to go to a school that I did some training with, and I go intro to Showbie. Here we are in this assignment, and I go to shared assignment, and this is, for me, is where assessment is actually quite powerful. So if I tap on the plus icon, underneath on the right hand side, there's this quiz. The penultimate item says quiz. That's actually Socrative. For those of you that don't know what Socrative is a remote assessment tool that is part of ClassKit in Showbie. It's hugely powerful, and it does a variety of things that are actually very, very useful from that assessment perspective. And I'll just do a little bit of a dig into this so we can kind of understand how this would support a hybrid learning environment. Okay, so if I just go into quiz, in Showbie, this is what I would be doing. I have to choose a room. I won't go into the details of that, but it's pretty simple. I would just kind of select a room. And when I'm in there, it allows me to access a variety of assessments that I've created in Socrative. We'll have a look at that in a minute, okay? And once I pick the actual assessment that I want to give out to students and tap next, what Socrative very cleverly then does is it gives me three options. It gives me the ability to deliver something teacher-paced, right? So the first one, teacher-paced, that allows me to control not just which questions pop up, but also when the questions pop up as well. So I'm controlling the pace. So quite often teachers worry about our students looking something up somewhere else. Well, actually, if you decrease the time between the questions and so on, there's less time, less risk of that happening. Teacher pace is also used as a tool to kind of check children's learning before the lesson starts, so you kind of know where they're at. But at the same time, you could do a quick fire teacher pace session assessment at the end of the feedback. So it's kind of more frequent. You could do it within 20 minutes. You could do it at the end of a session. It's pretty easy to use. The next function is open navigation, the one above that. Now, that is actually quite a powerful tool, because what this does is it allows you to kind of have an open quiz that might run for 2 weeks, and students might be studying a project long term, and they would, as their knowledge increases and their misconceptions are cleared, they can actually go in and answer questions and so on. And the quiz will remain open until you hit the finish button anyway, but it allows the students to go in and correct their answers. It allows the students to go in and change their answers until you hit the finish button. And finally, there's instant feedback, which is kind of like very much like kind of traditional assessment tool. You can put in multiple choice, true, false, and so on. Now, there are schools now that I'm working with that are now building their assessment policies that take in to the fact that there are digital solutions out there that are very powerful, that can reduce workload, that do self-marking. The effort really needs to be into the design of the assessment. What questions are we actually asking, and what's the best way to kind of test this, and so on. So that is, and then obviously it does self-marking, and there's a number of reports here that I'm going to show you in a minute that actually are quite powerful from a teacher's perspective as well. So and you can do things like this, so you can shuffle questions. So everybody gets the questions, but they're going to get them in different order, and it means that they cannot text their friend and say, hey, what did you put for question 1, and so on. So that's actually quite key and quite powerful. Okay, if I was to start the quiz, obviously these students and this class is not active, but if I was to start the quiz, my screen then begins to look like this. You see that World Facts quiz, this would pop up on the student side as well. So if I tap on Aisha, for example, you'll see the World Facts quiz has popped up on her screen, and she would tap it, and then she'd be able to answer the questions. If I just go into shared items and tap on my quiz, here we are, it launches the quiz, and you can see it's giving me actually a very clear, nice table there. I can see the names of the students, although they're not students actually. I can ask it to show me responses, and I can get it to show me results as well. And this would be now live. So if this class was actually active, I would now start seeing responses. It would tell me whether they put true or false. So the yellow questions are like true or false, like this. Multiple choice, like this. Let me go back in there. For example, we have the blue ones, which are kind of true or false. So this is, if I just tap on the question, it'll show me that. So that can be kind of useful as well. And obviously we have open-ended questions where they can actually put in. So I would now be seeing this actually popping up and people answering questions and so on. And right at the bottom, if I scroll down, I would be able to see the percentage. I would be able to see the percentage pass mark for each question. So that would all be giving me feedback. Once I've done this, if I was to just hit the finish button, here, there we go. This finishes the activity. So my quiz has ended. And if you look at the top now, this World Facts quiz is grayed out. And right at the end, there's these 3 dots. And if I tap on that, it now gives me this option. I can view the results again, but I can distribute scores. I can distribute reports. If I distribute scores, it does this thing that you can see on the left-hand side with the yellow boxes. It automatically exports the grades. And if I distribute reports, then it will produce an individual PDF report for each student and email and send it to them in Showbie. So for example, I did this earlier with this particular class. No, it wasn't this class. Let me just show you one that I did earlier with this group. It was actually. Let's just go into here. And if I just go into Dominic and scroll down and have a look at his kind of content here, and you'll see an example of the report that was sent to him. It was some time back. So this is what it looks like, right? It's a PDF report. And this is what I mean by, referring back to feedback that's been mentioned. I've got a variety of ways, I can give feedback. I can scribble, scroll, and ask questions here as well. There's voice notes that I can add. Like you can see there, which I can shrink and move about and associate with a specific question and so on. So the type of feedback that they're getting is actually quite powerful. So it's telling them what they got right. If they got something wrong, it would point to the correct answer out. You have the option to do that. If parents are involved, they can kind of see this. So from a student perspective, it's good feedback, and you can dig deeper for those students that you want to. If you feel, I want to know a little bit more whether the student actually, how does the student know about question 4? You can add a voice note, you can annotate this as well. So this is actually quite powerful. Showbie does have a portfolio feature, so this little star in the top right hand corner, you can kind of put that there. And also, if I tap on the names here, if I tap on the next student's submitted work will pop up, and I can give feedback and annotate there as well. And this just allows for super quick marking and so on, which can save a significant amount of time. If I just go into, just to complete the Socrative element, if I just go into here, and I'm just going to log in as a teacher. So we kind of launched remote assessment through Showbie, but actually this is where you can kind of create your quizzes and so on as well. I'm not going to do a deep dive into this. However, you can register for a webinar on understanding Socrative, and I kind of go into this a lot more detail. But the bit that I wanted to refer to with respect to supporting your hybrid learning environment is the fact that assessment is still a very important part, and these tools allow you to do that. And obviously research is showing that. So look, with this particular class, I did this world facts quiz, and here you can see, I can get you to see what responses they did. I can see whether the results are correct or not. Now it's important for me to toggle this on and off, because if I have this toggled off, I can still share this with the students, and they can see I can see who's responded and who hasn't, and that obviously increases a bit of engagement. You can see these are not students, by the way, with their names. So you can kind of see this, and it's pretty easy to kind of to navigate around this. And right at the bottom, I'm getting a percentage pass rate. I can see question 2, people are struggling with only 50% for whatever reason. So that might be something I want to have a look at. However, from a feedback perspective, if I just look at export, then here I get a variety of different reports that I can use very, very effectively. So I can get a complete results Excel sheet, which if I tap on and hit download, that will download onto my device or your laptop. By the way, this doesn't have to be on iPad. Everything that I'm showing you, it's kind of doable on a laptop as well, unless I say, hey, this is an iPad only kind of thing. So even annotations, voice notes, all of that you could do on a browser as well. So if I just tap on my downloads and I just tap on this, you'll see this Excel spreadsheet pop up. This was a gamified one, so there's teams that you can get them to join into. But I can kind of see things like this, so the average number of correct answers. So right at the bottom, 2.08, that could be something that I then begin to look across the board and kind of see as a constant. I can still see right and wrong answers and so on, whether they're open-ended or whether it kind of gives me a nice report to look at. The other kind of report is individual student PDF, but we've already seen that in Showbie. So you can do that as part of the Showbie integration. You don't need to come here for that part. You can come here for your results summary, for example, the third report, which is, and if I include explanations, this for me is quite powerful, because if I download this, here we go, and let me just show you what this looks like. It's a very neat PDF. And what I love about this is that if I bring your attention to the numbers next to each of the letters, that's telling me the distribution of correct and incorrect answers. It's kind of like a very quick question level analysis. So for example, question 1, there are definitely misconceptions with the students, but they're spread out. There's not any one thing that the misconception is. It looks like they just don't know. Half the class just does not know. And maybe I need to address that. If you look at question 2, it's a 50-50 thing. Again, there's potentially a misconception there that I need to look at. But if you look at question 3, actually the majority of the class get this. There's a few that don't, but and so on. So what this does is it's kind of allowing me, if I go back to our presentation, Hi everyone, apologies if I just cut off there. I just noticed I had. Okay, we should be back on again now. Apologies about that. So if I just go back to the presentation, and this is the one that we were looking at, what we find is that that assessment element is actually quite powerful, and that feedback, and the two things really kind of connect, and Socrative is a brilliant way of making that happen. So whether it's formative assessment or summative assessment, you can use the variety of different quizzes to be able to do that. Also retrieval practice, checking to make sure that the students understand learning after each episode of learning, and that might be built in. So again, Socrative has this quick question feature as well that allows you to just kind of ask questions very, very quickly. And that can be kind of easy to kind of set in place. So within your presentations or within your kind of flipped learning video that you've made, you can ask questions, put up slides with questions that check their learning, and actually provide a polling kind of service through Socrative that then allows students to kind of respond to that. So you can kind of check as you go along. So this is actually quite key in that approach. Okay, so finally, just kind of coming up to engagement. Engagement is really kind of an interesting term because engagement matters. We do want students engaged. However, from a remote perspective, it can be typically very hard to do that. Now, there are tools in ClassKit, I'm going to finish off on this, that allow you to kind of increase engagement. But there's a couple of things that we have to really kind of be aware of. Number one, we don't want engagement to kind of distract from the teaching of the curriculum. So if it's adding to encouraging the curriculum, hey, then it's a great thing. So checking to make sure the students are still learning, and that assessment piece is actually big. And Socrative is a good way of doing that. There's a gamified version of that. So you have got engagement there, but actually the focus is on the curriculum, or the focus is on the assessment and so on. So that's actually a good way of doing it. Also, it's important, and this is a myth-busting kind of statement, but it's important to understand that engagement does not necessarily mean students are learning. It's important, but it doesn't actually translate to learning, and we've really got to be aware of that. So let's kind of have a look at some things that allow for engagement from a ClassKit perspective. There are a number of different tools that are part of ClassKit. You may be aware of some of them. So if I just pull up the third one along called Explain Everything. Let me see if I can just get that on its own. There we are. Explain Everything is part of ClassKit. It's basically a really powerful whiteboarding tool. There are teachers that even before COVID have been using Explain Everything as their whiteboarding tool. So they'll write on their device and so on, and the device is connected to the big screen and it appears on the big screen. Whereas a lot of teachers still write on the whiteboards or use digital boards and so on. This practice has been actually quite powerful. Why is it powerful? Because of a number of reasons actually linked to that research piece. So for example, I've got some slides of me here. So this might be PowerPoint slides and so on. I can upload these directly here. I can now also use the pen feature to annotate and do different things if I wanted to. Very, very easy. But if I bring your attention to the bottom where I'm just drawing the arrow, you can see that there's a record button there. So this would record everything that I'm doing. Yeah. So any explanations that I'm doing, any of that stuff is all recorded into a nice neat video. And if students were asking me questions in class, that will be recorded as well, because the microphone feature is built in. And I would capture all of that and make that available in Showbie, because it links directly into Showbie. You can do this, export, and if I do video, it'll turn it all into a video. And there's Showbie, and now I can just choose which class and where it's going into. Super simple. And I could share it with a class, I can share it with students. That integration is beautiful. It's kind of very easy to do. You can do it from a laptop as well. But where this becomes quite powerful is that it's technology allowing us to do things that we couldn't do before. So what I mean by that is that actually the teachers can, students can watch this as many times as they want, whereas traditionally they'd only be listening to the teacher and then that's it, they would be kind of stuck there. So this is actually quite powerful as a tool, and also finally as part of ClassKit as well is another quite engaging tool, but obviously depending on how you use it, this Hologor tool, and if I just bring that up, that will actually allow us to kind of, it's got a variety of different subjects. It's brilliant for clearing complicated things and misconceptions, but it does things like this. If I just do biology, I can just pull up an animal cell and it gives me the option to have it 3D. So I could do this on a laptop, but actually I can also, so I can manipulate this and move it around and zoom in and ask questions about it, because I could screen record again through Loom or on the iPad. I could do an AR version of this as well. So there it is. And I can kind of zoom into this. There's labeling and all this kind of stuff. There's gamification. So I've got to try and match the labels with the different things and so on. So cell surface membrane maybe, and I've got to kind of link it through and so on. There are kind of things for primary schools as well in terms of objects and animals, and you can kind of start asking, you can set assignments in this way as well. So don't just think about it as something that you use it to explain, which you can, but actually you could say, here's an elephant, let's look at the adaptation features. Can you use Hologor, record your voice and actually begin to explain to me, how this animal kind of, survives in its habitats and what adaptations it has and so on. And you could record this and the students could submit this as a video as well. So these things are actually quite powerful tools to be able to look at. They're all part of ClassKit and they all integrate into Showbie. There are others as well. There's a computer science curriculum. There's a kind of more simplified whiteboard for teachers to use as well. That kind of brings me to the end of this. If there are questions, absolutely feel free to put on Q&A. I'm kind of conscious I've gone a few minutes over as well. And finally, this is my email. Feel free to take that down and drop me a line if you actually want a copy of this as well, or you want to share this with your team. I'm more than happy to kind of give you a copy of this as well. Thank you very much for joining, and I'll wait a couple of minutes. If there are questions, feel free to kind of put that on there and I'll be more than happy to answer questions. So I've just got a question come through. What was the last tool called? The last tool is called Hologor. There it is. Not the first icon. Hang on, I'll type it out so it's the only icon that's there. There it is, Hologor. That's the tool that I used. And it's included as part of ClassKit. So that might be something worthwhile looking at. Any other questions? Yes, Gillian, the kids need Socrative, but in ClassKit, teachers get the pro version of Socrative. The kids can just use the free version. So the kids don't need a license. They don't need to do anything. They can kind of access that very, very easily. If you're interested in knowing more about Socrative and how that connects, or kind of getting a deep dive into Socrative and how quizzes are done and you can share them and all that kind of stuff, then absolutely you can attend the Understanding Socrative webinar. If I just go to showbie.com, you can register here. I will also mention, so yeah, absolutely, you can kind of go to the Showbie website, and where the blue line is at the top, there's a bunch of webinars there that you can kind of register for. That focus on a variety of this, so Understanding Showbie and Socrative are a key part. The other thing that you might not know about, which actually might be useful, is we have created a program called Showbie Certified Educators, and this focuses on teaching rather than just the Showbie features and so on. And this is something that if you are a Showbie school, you can absolutely get your teachers to kind of log on to and have a look at. It's a simple registration. There's 4 modules on communication, engagement, assessment, and efficiencies. And you can, get teachers to do this. Some people have been doing this and as part of their CPD kind of thing. And we've got teachers from all over the world that are now kind of Showbie certified educators. You can connect with them as well. Some of them have kind of shared their details as well. But absolutely feel free to look at that. It's a good source of understanding in terms of the possibilities with Showbie as well. I will stop there, and if there are no more questions, I'll say thank you very much for joining, and absolutely feel free to get in touch if there's anything else I can help with. Thank you, be safe, and have a wonderful day wherever you are.